In the last video, we made a program of finding the max of 3 numbers. Today, we'll make a program of finding the max of 4 numbers using the nested ternary operator. So this was the program we made in our previous class. Now I'll make a new file for finding the maximum of 4 numbers. So I'll name my class as max 4. We'll save it in Java proc folder with the name max4.java. Okay, so we'll now have our main function, that is public static void main, and the string type argument string out. Okay, so now as I need to find the max of 4 numbers, so I'll take here 4 numbers, that is A, B, C and D. Okay, I'll store in D 7, here I'll store 4, here I'll store 13, and here I'll store 15. Okay, so now if I talk about the logic, what is the logic behind finding the max of 4 numbers? So if we talk about 4 numbers, so first let's take 2 numbers A, B, and these are C and D. These are the 4 numbers we want to find the max of. Okay, so now if we talk about A and B, first we'll compare both of them. So if A is greater than B, then we will have one condition. So first we'll check that whether if A is greater than B. So if A is greater than B, then this block of code will execute, and if A is less than B, then another block in the if part, that is else part, will be executed. So when A is greater than B, then we'll check another condition, that if whether A is greater than C or not. So if this is true, then we'll again check that whether A is greater than D or not. So if A is greater than D, that means here we can see A is greater than B, A is greater than C, as well as A is greater than D. That means A is the result, that is means A is the maximum. And if A is not greater than D, that means D is the greatest. Okay, so in the else part we'll have here D. Okay, in the else part. Okay, so now if I talk about A greater than C, if this condition is false, that means we have C greater than A, and also A is greater than B. You can see from this condition, so we are having this. Now the variable left is D, so we'll compare that whether this is greater than D or not. That means whether C is greater than D or not. If C is greater than D, that means C is the maximum, and in the else part we'll be having D maximum. Okay, so now if we talk about the else part, when A is less than B, again we'll check all these conditions. Instead of A, we'll now be having B. So we'll check if B is greater than C, then we'll execute this line of code. And in the else part, when C is greater than B, we'll execute this line of code. Okay, so when B is greater than C, then we'll again check whether B is greater than D or not. That means B is maximum, and if this condition is false, that means D is greatest. Now if we talk about when C is greater than B, then again we'll simply solve it like this. We can say that C is greater than B, also B is greater than A from this condition, and now the only left variable is D. So if this is greater than D, then we have C maximum from here, else in the else part we have the D maximum. Okay, so this is the logic. Now we'll make the program. that is we'll store in result. I'll take a int type variable here, int result. Then we'll be having here a, a greater than b, a greater than b. So if this is true, then execute this block of code, else execute this block of code. Now when a is greater than b, we'll again check if a is greater than c, then check this block of code, else go in this. Now if you talk about this one, when b is greater than a, so we'll now check if b is greater than c, then execute this block of code, else execute it. Now if you talk about a greater than c, we'll again check if a is greater than d, then a is maximum, else d. Now this is the false part when a is less than c. Okay, so when a is less than c, that means c is greater than a. So we'll check whether c is greater than d. If it is true, then c is greatest, else d. Now if we talk about this one, that is if b is greater than c is true, then we'll check whether b is also greater than d. Then we have b greatest, else we have d greatest. When b is not greater than c, that means c is greater than b. So we'll check for c that whether c is greater than d or not. If this is true, that means c is maximum, else d. Okay, so I'll save this and then we'll print our results stored in the result variable of int type, that is system.out.println, and the result. Okay, now we'll run it. We'll go in C drive in Java proc folder, cmd. So Java C, and the name of file is max4.java. Then we have the run command, that is Java, and class name is max4. Okay, so we got the output as 15, as max of 15, 13, 4 and 7 is 50. So if I explain you a little bit of this logic, okay, so just a second. Okay. Now here you can see the first condition is if a is greater than b. Okay, so if a is greater than b, if this is true, then execute this whole block. And if a is not greater than b, then execute this. Okay, so this is the true part of a greater than b, and this is the false part of a greater than b. So here I'll write f for false and true for true. Okay, so now if I talk about a greater than c over here. Okay, so a greater than c is true, then execute this block of code, and if it is false, execute this. Similarly for b greater than c, if that is true, execute this one. If b is not greater than c, then execute this. Okay, similarly now if I talk about this a greater than d. Okay, if a greater than d is true, that means a is greater than d, then we'll take the result as a. And if d is greater than a, that is the false condition of this one, then d is greatest. Similarly here in this, if I talk about c greater than d, also we have the same thing. If it is true, we have c as result, and if c is not greater than d, then d is maximum. Now for b greater than d, if I talk about b greater than d, then if b is greater than d, this is true, then we in b max we have b, and if d is greater than b, then the result is d. Similarly, for C greater than D also, if C is greater than D, then the result is C, and if this is false, that means D is greater than C. So D is maximum. Okay. So you need to practice it on your own. Take some copy and pen and write the logic with your own hands. So when you do it, then only your logic will be cleared. Okay, that's it for this video. In the next video, I'll take one more example of a leap year which we have already done using the if else, nested if else, and now we'll solve it. Here you can see I was having this leap year program and we did it using the if else. Now we'll do it again using the ternary operator in the next video. Thank you.